we need to know this. Like, we need to know that it's not just about what we do, but it's about the when and the why and the how, not just the what.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today I'm here with Sarah Kucera, who is the author of the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook. She's been championing healthy practices professionally for over a decade and personally for her whole life. A licensed chiropractor, certified Ayurvedic practitioner, registered yoga teacher and yoga therapist, and an entrepreneur. She's the founder of Sage, a healing arts center and herbal apothecary in Kansas City, Missouri, where she combines these methods to help others find well-being. She is the author of the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook and the 7 Ways of Ayurveda, which is going to be coming out in 2022. Thank you so much for being with us today, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
It's so great to catch up with you. It's been a few years since we've seen each other in person and miss our time there at Ayurveda doing our masters together. And it was so lovely just to be there with everyone. And well, since then, you've written this book that's done really well, the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook. I was mentioning to you weeks ago that I saw your book when I was over at Kripalu in Massachusetts a couple weeks ago for the Nama board retreat. And it's like, oh, there's Sarah's book. And it's just always fun when you see your friend's book on the shelf. And I'm curious, though, I never really got the background on being a person who wrote a book. I mean, I know that there's this drive that comes from somewhere to write a book. What inspired you to write this particular book, the Ayurvedic Self-Care Handbook?
I was purely inspired by what I felt like, I don't want to say like misuse of Ayurveda, but you know how a lot of people come to like a holistic, or like, I'm using air quotes, natural medicine, because they say like they don't want to use pharmaceuticals. But what I felt like when I was practicing is that I was constantly being met with people that really wanted to just use herbal therapies. Or they might just say like, what do I do to my diet and what herbs can I take? And then I started thinking like, is this different than pharmaceuticals? You know, like if I'm just saying like, take this, and I of course know the difference between like a pharmaceutical and an herbal therapy, but in some way it just felt like we were missing the foundation. And I was guilty of it too, because herbs were exciting and learning about the Ayurvedic diet and who should eat what and all of that was really fun. But what I was finding is just that people had no routine. And I don't mean that they maybe were doing the things that would work for them for health, but they were just so sporadic. So no one was being consistent. And it's people that by text would have been really doing the things that you would think, like if they were to list the things that they were doing to stay healthy, it would have looked like this person should be a picture of health. But what was happening is that they were eating lunch maybe one day at 11, maybe one day it was at 2, maybe they would skip lunch, maybe they would do just a superfood sort of meal, or they'd have varying bedtimes, varying sleep times. And so what I became really interested in was actually this, what I always call is like our container for life, and not just emphasizing what do we put in the container, but that the container is important. And so that was actually how all of this came to me. And it was really during when you and I were in school together, because I did my thesis on routine and health. And that's when I really felt like we need to know this. Like we need to know that it's not just about what we do, but it's about the when and the why and the how, not just the what.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you have a great point about, for whatever reason, people are attracted to herbal medicines versus synthetically created pharmaceuticals. That's a dynamic and a whole separate conversation, but it could just become very much like that, where like these people that come to you and they've got like 20 supplements they're on. You're like, oh my God, that's another
Yeah.
thing.
It's true. Actually, just last week in a session with someone, what she really wanted to do with me is she brought all of the supplements she was taking, and there were like 15. And we went through them together and just kind of said, who prescribed this to you, or who recommended it, and why, and when, and how does it make you feel? And yeah, like you just sort of, you want so badly for there to be an answer that comes in a packaged little tablet in a pretty little bottle. And for sure, those things are super supportive of us. But I just felt like we were relying too much on that. And it's like, we have to also do the other things that help us. And of course, like routine is paramount in Ayurveda. I was like, why am I missing this?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I remember learning how the energy of, I think the texts call it the physician, right? The
Mm-hmm.
energy of the practitioner, we could say, the energy of the practitioner is carried through the herbs
Mm-hmm.
to the person being healed. And that's an interesting dynamic when somebody comes with 20 different supplements that they're on and they've all come from different people, but
Mm-hmm.
they're not really even seeing those people anymore. That's like an old influence. And it's really great to have people question, like, why are you actually taking this? Because I remember there's even a lot of people who've been on, pharmaceuticals for like 20 years for, mild depression or something. You're like, is this actually helping you still? So that I think it's super cool. And this thing about rituals, because I read your book and I love, you told a story about, how important they were to you as a child. And
Mm-hmm.
is this ritualistic aspect of Ayurveda that you think like really attracted you to it?
No, not at the time. And I find myself becoming kind of passionate about different things during different stages of my life, which is probably related in large part to the amount of vata that I have in my constitution. Like, not just the passionate, obviously, is more pitta, but more of the shifts from one thing to the next. And so my initial draw to Ayurveda was really more about, like, kind of what I was talking about is how can we treat some of these things that maybe have more simplistic answers to them than we may know or may seek. And I was a yoga practitioner and teacher, and I was also a chiropractor at the same time. And so, like, to me, this felt like a good connector between everything I was already doing. So, that, in fact, I have said recently that one of the things that really drew me to Ayurveda, I could just imagine myself like foraging herbs, and like mixing them and doing what felt like some sort of modern day like witchcraft, honestly, in like the funnest kind of way. And then it's funny that like after the fact, I'm like, that's not really the essence of this practice. So, and I like still routine and things are so, so, so important to me. But even now, which not that long after publishing this book, I do feel my passion within Ayurveda also shifting a little bit.
It's interesting. I think what I'm hearing is almost like this idea of people, trying to medicate something or treat something regardless of the intervention, but not necessarily looking at the root cause. Like, here, you're going to keep drinking 3 glasses of wine every night, but you want to take this herb because you're feeling like you have a lot of anxiety and your pitta's up. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, it's totally like that. But what was more confusing to the people that I was seeing, it's like they're not having wine or they are sleeping. Like they would say, like I am sleeping 8 hours. And I would say, well, what time do you go to bed? Well, I go to bed at midnight and I wake up at 8. And as you and I know, like that just doesn't really work in this system or in Western medicine, because our circadian rhythms and the Ayurvedic clock really teach us how all these important processes happen at these different times of day. And if there's misuse of time, which is like a cause of disease, which is, also like misuse of like going against nature or misuse of your intellect. Yeah, like you can't just remedy it, especially for a long time, by simply taking something for it.
but we don't like to change.
No, well, you know what else is it's hard to do what's not easy to do. Yeah. The idea of just saying, you know what, you're sleeping the right amount of time, but could you just go to bed like a couple of hours earlier? And then again, like hypothetically saying that if you just went to bed 2 hours earlier and you wouldn't have to take these herbs or you wouldn't have to take these medications, it's often easier for someone to take the herbs or take the medication. It's harder for them to shift their bedtime. Just crazy.
Yeah. And like you live in middle America, you live in
Mm-hmm.
Kansas City, Missouri. The
Mm-hmm.
one of the Kansas cities, the other one's in
Mm-hmm.
Kansas. You live in the
Yeah.
one in Missouri.
Yep.
And I know because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there are a lot of people who don't know what Ayurveda is, even here
Mm-hmm.
being a
Mm-hmm.
more sort of connected globally kind of place. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say largely more India-phile here in the Bay Area. So like I would assume it's much less well known where you live. And so tell me if I'm right or wrong on that. And then how do you explain Ayurveda to a stranger or to someone that you're just explaining it to for the first time?
I have to only assume that it's less common or that people don't know what Ayurveda is purely because I live in the downtown area, which is a little more progressive than, maybe if we kind of span out toward more of a suburban area. And I don't have a car, so I walk everywhere. And my sort of circle is within a very small, it's a very narrow circle. And so I'm typically around people who do know what these things are because they've sought that out themselves or they know me or somehow there's a connection with it. And there's also a very strong yoga community here, and yoga being the sister science and Ayurveda being sister sciences, you know, you'll hear about both. So I would agree that, like, in general, these types of practices, or even just being more centered on health and wellness and prioritizing clean eating or exercise, and exercise is harder here because it's not, we have few days that have ideal weather because we have very extreme weather. We have really cold winters and we have very hot and humid summers. So overall, whether it's Ayurveda or another component to wellness, it's probably less popular here. However, there is in Iowa, the Maharishi Center, which is not too far away from where I am. And so and my home state is Iowa. So this town that's probably, I think, like a 4 or 5 hour drive from here is built upon the principles of Ayurveda and Vastu and all of that. So there is in itself an epicenter within Middle America that knows all about Ayurveda. So I think it is less known, but at the same time, I think people here are open-minded. And again, I might be, as one of my friends says, that, and this is probably too political at this point, but just saying, like, we're a blueberry and tomato soup. And there's just saying that there's a difference in, like, the center versus, like, when you flow out into different surrounding areas, that there's different ideas or people have different, ways of living and so forth. The best way that I have found, and actually, to be quite honest, it's hard for me to explain what I do in general because I'm a small business owner and much of my day is spent doing management type of work, admin type of work for our center. So that could be my title. I am a chiropractor. So I could, meet someone and say, I'm a chiropractor. I'd love to call myself an author. I've written 2 books now. And so if I choose and say I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, they'll say, I don't know what that is, right? So I'm kind of used to having struggles with explaining myself no matter what. But the easiest way to explain Ayurveda is just reminding people that we're connected to nature. And when I can say something like, it's a system that really is focused on us staying in sync with outer nature and inner nature. Outer nature, such as the light dark cycle, like a 24-hour clock, or the seasons, but our inner nature, such as like following our heart, living an authentic life. And that resonates with people. And so sometimes it's just that simple to say that. And then if they have questions beyond that, I can answer them. But you can tell it's like the people that get it, they get it. And so I don't actually find explaining it to be too tricky at all, aside from just, wondering, should I tell them that this is what I do?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I had decided to focus on women's health in the beginning, because I found it challenging to explain to some people, and it felt like it took just too much time to have to bridge this gap. But what I could do is I could say, well, what's going on with you? And, oh, okay, well, you have this problem with your whatever in your health. And, oh yeah, there are ways that I know how to treat that with this,
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of one of the ways I got around it. But I think there's a lot more people who know about Ayurveda now. It seems like
Mm-hmm.
but there's also like, I think people are confused about what it is, right? Because they're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
is it this sort of thing that I read about in Goop?
Mm-hmm.
Or, and then there's
Yeah.
the whole
Yeah.
clinical practice of it, which is different than the, self-care practice of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I mean, they both are really necessary, but I love the self-care aspect of it because I just think there's such a huge gap between what regular people know about how their bodies and how nature works
Mm-hmm.
versus
Mm-hmm.
like a medical doctor or someone who studied medicine and actually knows what the bone in that leg is called and
Mm-hmm.
knows what the
Mm-hmm.
function of this organ is. And I think that part of our role is actually teaching people about how their bodies work. And
Mm-hmm.
that's going to help everybody. It's going to help the healthcare system. And it's also going to help us. It's going to help us so much to know
Mm-hmm.
how our bodies work. And this idea of rituals that you write a lot about, and it's super important in order to be able to concentrate and get the focus that we need on our bodies. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that rituals have had on you personally?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, you mentioned a little earlier that in my book I talk about rituals and how important they were to me when I was growing up. And I think that I'm 43 now, and so that means I was born in 1978. So I grew up in the 80s. And when you think about the 80s, we didn't have a lot of the things to derail us from routine. We didn't have the ability to be connected through text messages. We didn't have the internet. We had answering machines and things like that. But like if you weren't home, no one would contact you. People couldn't work from home that easily. So in some ways there wasn't even an option to not have routine. And so, I started focusing on that part of or looking back on that part of my life when I thought, wow, people were living in more connection with nature when I was growing up. And then when I started to think like, well, I felt really good and I still feel good, but when I think about how I felt as a child, I was rarely sick. And it just seems like it was such a powerful thing to have that idea of sort of knowing the rhythm of like, this is when my mom comes home from work. This is when my dad comes home from work. And this is what we do on a Sunday morning. And this is what a Sunday morning feels like. And this is what a Friday evening feels like. And everything just sort of had like a feeling or an essence to it. And so when I think about that and how I might be able to use that to me now, it's so comforting. And so rituals have now taken this place in my life that have really kept me more grounded, have really helped me live in a way that I feel like is in alignment with who I am. And I'm talking about things like rituals can be, complex, or they could be indulgent, or, rituals could be viewed as different ways. But I'm talking about like, I get up every morning and I go for a walk. And that walk is super important to me because something happens on that walk that makes me clear my head and feel ready for the day and kind of become organized. And so without that, I just don't think that I would even be able to live in a way that felt like I was living like to my fullest potential. Maybe I would be in a bad mood when I'm around people. It would just affect me in ways that, yeah, that just wouldn't make me feel good, whether that's in body or in mind.
So the yoga practice and things like that, is that also part of this ritual building in your life?
That yoga was important in ritual building. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
No. So I feel like my connection with yoga now, I was attracted to yoga first and foremost, and I've been practicing yoga for over 20 years. And it was never a ritual in the context of it being like something that I woke up every morning and did. Where it is important to me is actually the other aspects that come along with yoga, this idea of turning inward and really being connected with my inner self instead of paying attention always to the things that are outside of me. So really more from like a meditation perspective. And that in itself is really important to me. And whether I get that through my yoga practice, through simply a meditation practice, or through a walk, that is probably the best way. And that came from yoga. But whether it's what we think of as our modern day yoga or our Western yoga, that I would just flat out say, no, not quite. That's not quite how it came to me.
Yeah, I say that because it actually was a huge deal for me. Just like
Mm-hmm.
my morning practice and getting up
Mm-hmm.
and do my meditation. It's like, I think for me, that was such a huge piece of my container that I need in order to be my best person that I could be.
Yeah, and I would say like I need it. I definitely need it. And I think, my hesitation when you asked and having like asking you to repeat it again, the question is I kind of caught myself off guard like, like yeah, that wasn't really that important in terms of building a routine or ritual for me. It played a different role in my life. It didn't play that specific role because I never was that like more every single morning to get up and have that incorporated into my morning routine.
I get so excited. I get this like kind of goosebump feeling when I get a booking from a new client that I haven't met yet. And I get so excited because I know that somebody has made a decision to go really, really, really deep into their healing. Because I know that Ayurveda is not a quote unquote normal thing that many people have access to, at least not in the United States where I live. So I know that when someone books with me, that they've really made a decision that they want to go deep into their healing. And so you could do that on my website at heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. You can book me for either a Ayurveda consultation if you're ready to dive in, or you can also book me for a 15-minute connection call if you're not sure where to go yet. I do have a couple offerings that are not on my website, and we could talk about that. So I look forward to meeting you. Too much vata and pitta. I'm too kapha for that. It's like, well, I mean, also you're an entrepreneur, right? So you have a business, your life demands. And I would say that like the more involved I get and more duties I have and things like that in life, the harder it is for me to have those morning moments. And there's a totally different life dynamic that emerges in those moments. So it sounds like you've really mastered in some way the kind of entrepreneur rhythm and that it's manifested, because I don't view myself as an entrepreneur in any way, even though like I have my own business, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I don't really identify with that very much,
Mm-hmm.
but you have this
Mm-hmm.
more dynamic energy, I think, that you're moving around. I mean, you don't have a car, but you have a skateboard.
That's true, but I haven't used it lately because there's a lot of construction around here. It's a little dangerous.
Yeah. And just like this mobility aspect that you have
Hmm.
to you and,
Yeah.
pointing to your vata and your pitta, which you mentioned earlier. But I
Hmm.
guess when we get into these ritual buildings, and maybe this doesn't come up for a lot of people, but I've found that sometimes myself or other people or my clients or whatever, that there's also this thing where we could develop a ritual or routine and actually start to get a little bit too rigid or inflexible with it. Have you
Hmm.
seen that be a theme? Or is that
Hmm.
something that I can't remember if you addressed that in your book?
It's definitely a theme. I don't specifically address it in my book, but I do address it in a little bit in my next book with discussing how specifically with pittas, how they can become kind of, they're sharp and there is oftentimes a rigid quality where they're very much like they're almost overly systematized sometimes. So I haven't really felt that. I mean, I would say, like, yes, there are certain things that I may be like, even my walk, like I'm kind of attached to it. Am I rigid with it? No, like I can be a little bit flexible. But I think that also I've learned how to manage that. I've learned that I have to be flexible, I can't be rigid. I do see it in other people, how perhaps like they would say, this is how I've done something my whole life. And it's sort of they believe worked for them their whole life, only come to find out that because they didn't change it halfway through their life, it's now causing a problem and it's not appropriate for them anymore. So I do see this happen with people. And the recommendation that I often give is to say that perhaps you have a weekly check in with yourself, that at the end of the week, you sort of do like a self-assessment of how do I feel? What emotions were running strong this week? How did I feel physically? What was happening with my sleep? How was just sort of what they might deem as important for their baseline. And for some people, it's more like, let's do a seasonal check-in. Okay, if everything's going great, then, maybe you can stick with what you've been doing. But there's also a chance that you might have to change something based off of how you feel or based off of what season is coming up and so forth. So I think that routine can absolutely become rigid. And I also, even just within, like when people come and they want to me for an appointment and they want to have a food list, and I'm so hesitant to give them a list of foods because I just feel like they can become rigid with anything, right? They can also become rigid with that and only see like this is the only thing that I should be doing or the only thing I should be eating, or I can't have this. And Ayurveda is like, as Dr. Shrestha would say, like everything is good and everything is bad and nothing is good and nothing is bad. So basically, like there's a time and place for everything, and it's all about how you are in the moment.
I really relate to that idea of not wanting to give the food lists. I'm equally hesitant to do that. And I have a different way that I do that. I have people like have a recipe that they like to make. And I say, all right, tell me, because I don't like to cook. I also don't like to give people recipes.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I almost forgot.
So I'll say, okay, what's something you like to cook? And then what are the ingredients in it? And what do you think this does to your body? What does it do to your vata, your pitta, your kapha? What does this do? What kind of agni is this appropriate for? Whatever. And how would you change that in order to accommodate your particular condition that would work better for your body? Because it's true. We love to just get instructions that from someone and carry them out. It is how we were taught in school growing up. This is how you get an A. You memorize this thing and then, okay, you just memorize it. Plus this equals this. And then, but there's a different type of knowledge. And I think when we're first learning something, it's maybe a little more necessary to give people lists and things so that they could they have some guardrails in some way.
Yeah.
But there's at some point the person has to understand, well, why? And you talked about this in the beginning, like why does this work? Why does this not work? What's the context of that? And I think that that's one of the things that Ayurveda is really, it adds a dimension to the thinking in some way.
Yeah, that just prompted a thought that I had, which is when I'm specifically talking with people about how to develop routines or how to restructure their day, something that I want them to do is to observe what they naturally feel like doing. Because sometimes what you and I might recommend for them, which is per like textbook even, and not to say like we're not using our own intellect or, working with how it fits for everyone, because that's exactly what we're doing. But I want them to see like, well, what naturally works for you? What's your natural inclination? And kind of like what you said, now, why would this be good for you? How could this contribute to you feeling your best? And how could this potentially not be the best thing for you? So kind of, looking, it's like the recipe in a way that you were saying, but to work with that from the idea of routine, just to kind of also take into account, what does this person need? What does this person naturally feel like? Because it's also kind of like the guardrails, as you say, that you got to give them a little bit of structure for sure. But if it's also not what they want to do, they won't stick with it. There's like a middle ground, I think.
Yeah. And like finding, where does the desire come in?
Exactly.
The real desire.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really jealous of you because your house looks really clean all the time. When I see you on social media, I'm like, how does she keep her house so neat and tidy? And it's really, your kitchen looks as clean as I want my kitchen to look. But then I'm sort of wondering, does she have, clothes piled up behind that camera that I can't see?
You want the secret? So there are two secrets. One is that I only have like 800 square feet. So you have to keep it clean, right? Like everything is one open area. So you kind of can't have little piles. So the secret is to live small and to also kind of live minimal. I don't like to have a lot of things, but you'll take comfort in knowing that I do have one closet. In fact, in my place, I only have two closets. I have one closet that's the home for my clothes, and then I have another closet, which is a utility closet that I have, in fact, crammed a lot of things into. And I call it like the clown car of closets because you're not going to open it and things going to nothing's going to fall out at you. And it also actually also looks relatively organized, but maybe that's exactly what you're searching for. There's no pile of clothes, but there is a clown car closet in my
She's
place.
going to be opening up a haunted house there for Halloween in that closet.
But you know what it really is?
Yeah.
I don't do well around clutter. And I know that for my mind, like the first thing, if I start to feel anxious, I'll stop what I'm doing and clean and organize because it will settle me down. So there's that too.
I have the same thing. It's more challenging now with having a 4.5-year-old who brings sticks home in the house and things like that.
Yes,
It could drive you nuts. And that's why I think it's why it's also important, like when picking the right partner for our cleanliness, because my goodness, I can tell you that my standard of cleanliness is very different than my partner's. And there is something, I think everybody who's looked up Marie Kondo, right, gets this sense of, well, when your house is cluttered, your mind also gets cluttered. And I do think everybody feels that, but not everybody has, I don't know, maybe the sensitivity to it as well.
Yeah.
Now, you have this cat that you have this incredible relationship with named Bear. And do you, like, in terms of, because I know that I don't have a pet right now, but I've had many pets in my life. In fact, my parents were like the crazy cat people that had 12 cats at one point.
Oh my goodness.
That's a whole separate conversation about how that screwed me up.
Oh my goodness.
How my bag from college, every time I came home, they'd pee in it. And
my gosh.
Anyway, but this idea of having a pet, because in the San Francisco Bay Area, it seems like, everybody has one of these service dogs. And I was kind of curious what you thought about rituals and pets and like what role this idea of caring for a pet plays in our ritual building in our lives.
Well, have you ever heard that people with pets live longer? I feel like this was a statistic that was out years ago.
I haven't. I've never heard this, but my great grandma had cats till she was 92 and died. So I believe you.
So I latched on to this idea when I was kind of thinking about how important routines were, because I started thinking, I have heard that people with pets live longer. And I thought one outstanding thing, and this is assuming that it's a sort of responsible pet owner, is that pets have routines, right? I don't know about other pets other than like cats and dogs, but like you've got to take a dog for a walk. You've got to feed the cat. You've got to feed the dog. And so I think that in their own way, pets really require, it's just like children require you to have a routine, right? I don't know because I only have my cat Bear. So
they do. You're right.
So I think that it's just as children need their routine and kind of put you into a routine, pets do the same thing. And pets also have their own routine. Like my cat, if it's bedtime, he will kind of hover around me, like kind of like, why aren't you going to the bedroom yet? Like, and then when I go in and I get ready and I'm like, finally get into bed, it's like, okay, good. She's in bed now. I can also go to bed. It's sort of like he's kind of like waiting for that moment. So they have their own routines. Like we should take a cue from all the kitties and puppies and doggos of the world.
It's interesting. It's almost like they're contributing to the collective rhythm in some way that's being held and reinforced. And there's also this idea of, if the source of all of our malady is like our worrying about our little ego and ourselves and things like that, and this idea that there's something outside of us that we are caring for, I think there's something I would love to, I don't know if there's any research on that, but just this idea of being in service of something, which a pet requires us to be in service of them.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, because I certainly felt that about the pets that I had. And I remember even there was a time in my life where it was right after I left my corporate job and like went back to school to study Ayurveda. And
Mm-hmm.
I had all this free time in my schedule all of a sudden where I was like used to these super solid routines because I had a 9 to 5. And all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden I felt like I was flying out in space, and it was very ungrounding for me. I
Mm-hmm.
needed like more commitments in order to feel like my vata wasn't going too out of balance. And I remember I called up all my friends and I was like, can I watch your pets? Can I watch your pets? Can I sub a yoga class? Like I was just like looking for stuff to
Uh-huh.
commit
Yeah.
myself to,
Yeah.
because I was like,
Yeah.
I'm going crazy without
Right.
commitments.
Right. We
So
need it.
how do you like, considering all of, because you run a wellness center,
Mm-hmm.
you're writing books, there's so many things that you're doing. How do you find time to actually cook? Because I know you love to cook. How
Mm-hmm.
do you find time to do it and run a wellness center and write your books?
I love to cook, and so cooking is really important to me. I also have some go-to meals, like things that I know how long they take. I know the ingredients that I need. I don't need a list for them. So a lot of that's just in the prep work. And I don't do like, a Sunday prep where I like chop everything or anything like that. I think it's really more just that it's a priority to me and for me because I love being able to make my food. I love making food look pretty. I like to put it in a dish in a bowl that just like makes me feel good. So I think that it's more that I prioritize it. I do think it also helps that I don't have a long commute. It takes me about 3 to 4 minutes to get to work and to get home. So that's helpful. And I look for when I'm going to be able to make sure that I have an opportunity to prepare one meal at least a day that's like from scratch. And honestly, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I just move on to the next day.
I love that. You do have a really super local focus in your life, and that you seem to have minimized a lot of the mobility aspect. And that really does, as a lot of people are finding being on, working from home now, that additional time to be able to care for themselves is super important. And yeah, 3 to 4 minute commute sounds
Yeah.
pretty dreamy for some people, right?
I know, I know. And the other thing is I do, as I've already said a bunch of times, I go for a morning walk, but I also love to use walks as sort of like a transition piece in my day. So whether it's a transition from work to home or if I have afternoon work that's marked between like a break from morning work, then that might be a time that I walk to the store and pick up the things that I need to make my meal for the day. So I'm at the store buying food, if not every other day. So I'm always getting things that are fresh and trying to get only what I need. And that's also, I think, helpful because it's like I'm thinking about how I feel, what do I need, and I'm just getting what I need and don't have like a surplus of food that I end up throwing out or feeling pressured to cook or like, I don't know what to make. I have all these things. Like, no, I know exactly what I'm going to make.
That's so French of you.
Well, great. I'm not French at all, but it sounds lovely to be French.
You could go get a baguette later. Okay, so I like to ask everybody this final question.
hmm
What does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
Ooh, the wisdom of the body to me is like our inner guide. It's like an inner teacher that we can choose to listen, we can choose to override, and it will either reward us or it will perhaps work against us. Not that it's punishing us, but the wisdom of the body to me is really like an inner teacher.
Very well said. Sarah, thank you so much for being here today. And for the audience that would like to learn more about your work or your books, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, the best way is to either visit me on my website, which is sarahkucera.com, or I'm kind of an Instagram girl in the moment. So my Instagram handle is Sarah_Kucera.
And that's Sarah, Kucera, right? Kucera.
Yes. Yeah,
You have one of those hard last names like me.
I know.
I think mine's harder though.
Yours is definitely harder. hmm
Well, thanks so much for being here today, Sarah. I really love catching up with you.
Thank you. It was so fun. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.